Welcome to the Chris Spangle Show. Thanks so much for joining me. I am excited to come to you today to talk about one of the biggest issues facing the facing the country. I don't know why I said history, but it could be a historical catastrophe if we do nothing. Let's talk about it. It is the reformation of Social Security. And here to talk about it is our friend Jack Salmon. He's a Young Voices contributor and a writer on economics. His commentary has been featured in a variety of outlets, including The Hill, Business Insider, RealClearPolicy, and National Review Online. And he's written an article called Social Security Needs Bipartisan Solutions in RealClearPolicy.com. One of my favorite sites. I check it every day. Jack, thanks so much for being here. We really do appreciate it. You know, Social Security, I read recently that the United States government is an insurance agency with an army in terms of our budget. And the three big entitlements make up, I think, over 60% of our budget, and Social Security is a huge liability. Can you explain, just for those who may not be familiar with Social Security, what is it and what does it do?
So the Social Security system was initially founded in the 1930s during the Great Depression era. So it was an FDR project. And the intention was to provide essentially a safety net for the poor elderly. So those who were too old to be working and had retired but didn't have enough income to sustain themselves. So it was a small fraction of the population at the time. Obviously, it's evolved into something much bigger since then.
So, you know, in the beginning, I think it was, for every 20-some, maybe it was 200 people, there were people paying into the system, and then now we're down to what?
Yes. So the way people often, there's a misconception about Social Security. People often think that the money they're paying in through payroll taxes every month is their personal fund they're going to draw from in retirement. But in reality, the money that you're paying in payroll taxes every month is paying for current retarees' benefits. So that's fine if you have enough workers supporting retirees. So when the program was first founded, it was close to about 20 workers supporting every retiree. By the 1950s, it was about 9 or 10 workers supporting every retiree. And today it's less than 3 workers supporting every retiree. And that's projected to go down to 2. So to say it's unsustainable is to sort of underemphasize the issue at hand.
Yeah, there's people like me who have paid in, and I guess I just learned this, that what you pay in, what you earn, and what rate you pay in is what they'll pay you out. So I started at a low end of the Social Security payment, so I probably won't get that much, but I paid into it. I want my cut, Jack. Am I being unrealistic? Like, when I retire in 20, 30 years, will I be able to access Social Security, or do you buy into the idea that this is just not sustainable and won't exist by the time we retire?
Well, that question depends on what policymakers do, if they do anything. So what actually motivated me to write this piece was that in the run-up to the midterms, the president kept bragging about Republicans wanting to put Social Security on the chopping block. So I did some digging to see what his policy prescription was to ensure sustainability in the long term. He doesn't have one. So his policy is essentially to do nothing. And in 2034, which is according to the Social Security Trustees report that they publish every year, looking at the assets and liabilities and seeing how sustainable the program is, in 2034, the Social Security Trust Fund will be depleted. What the trust fund is over the years, the people paying payroll taxes, the amount of revenue collected from those folks was usually higher than the benefits withdrawn by retirees. And so they built up a trust fund for a rainy day fund, essentially, for when there was a deficit. But since 2010, the number of people paying in is actually lower than those who are withdrawing the benefits. And so we've had a deficit. So they've been drawing from that trust fund over the last 12, 13 years or so. That trust fund is now down to $2.7 trillion, and it's spiraling downwards very quickly. So by 2034, the trust fund will be depleted. What that means for beneficiaries like you and me is, starting in 2034, there will be an immediate 23% reduction in benefit payments. From there going forwards, unless they increase payroll taxes or some other budget maneuver, they're going to have to keep cutting those benefits over time. So you you will get Social Security benefits, but they won't be anything like the generous benefits our parents and grandparents would have received.
Okay, so that 23% cut, would that be immediate to anybody who's on Social Security at that point, like our grandparents?
Correct.
Okay, so not rolling out over time.
No, that would be immediate to everybody who's enrolled in the program at that year. But then from there moving forwards, as the revenues continue to miss the amount of benefits being withdrawn over time, that 23% is likely to grow larger and larger. So you'll get smaller and smaller amount of benefits, which is a very different scenario to what people have gotten used to, where there's these huge increases with inflation adjustments. But with the trust fund not there, it's just not going to be possible to make those financing obligations.
So let's talk about inflation, because I know that Social Security beneficiaries got I think kind of a big increase this past year, right? How do they determine that?
I think it was 8.7%. They tend to look at the CPI. So the CPI is the inflation metric they use, and they look at Q4 through Q4, so 2021 through 2022 Q4, and they estimated that 8.7 was the number that will be used for the cost of living adjustment for 2023. So that's I think 8.7% would be about $140 to $150 a month extra for the average Social Security beneficiary, which is really quite significant. So the average beneficiary would likely be getting over $1,800 a month this year. And I actually talked about the issues with the inflation metric in my piece. The CPI was a fairly useful metric in the 1980s when they first applied this as the metric used for cost of living adjustments, but it really tends to overemphasize a lot of price changes. Some economists have done some research into this, not by a significant amount, but even a minuscule difference in price adjustments really has a significant impact on the trust fund depletion. So moving towards something like a chain CPI would actually improve sustainability of the Social Security trust fund moving forward.
Okay, explain chain CPI to those of us who, you've come on this program. I don't know that much about economics, not like you. So explain it to me like you're talking to a 4-year-old.
So there are several different metrics for measuring inflation. The Fed has PCE. CPI is the one we often hear most about when we have the big annual inflation metric released every month. But chain CPI is an alternative version of CPI that tries to sort of cancel out some of the variability that comes over time. And the CBO actually estimated that it's about 0.3 percentage points lower on average than CPI. And they said that it's actually reflects price changes more accurately than the CPI itself. And that's certainly been the case over the last 2 decades or so. So there's a good case to make for moving from CPI to chain CPI when measuring cost of living adjustments for Social Security benefits, especially as it comes into the question of trust fund sustainability over time.
Okay, so this last one, for instance, and let me make sure I understand this, because in your piece you're talking, the last year's increase was 144 per beneficiary. Chain CPI would be $140 a month $140 a month increase. That's only $4. How does that save us any money if it's only $4?
It saves you. So it doesn't close the funding gap, but it's one reform that makes a small difference that compounds over time. So $4 a month is not a lot of money, but that's $48 per year per beneficiary. There are 65 million beneficiaries. So once you start doing the math, the numbers do start to add up, and it's the compounding effect over time. So inflation doesn't seem to bite that hard if you're only looking at 1 year's price change. When you start looking at the effects of inflation over 10, 20 years, the compounding effect really starts to have an impact. So, for example, last year I was writing about how terrible it was that we had 7% inflation. Well, 7% inflation looks bad, but when you look at the compounding effect and you instead say 7% inflation means that the cost of everything doubles every 10 years, that starts to that starts to make you realize the significance of compounding numbers over time.
All right, one that is actually France last week raised the age. This is one that is always talked here in the United States. So they raised the limit to 68, I believe, which means no car is safe in Paris. But that is one reform that could be taken here. The current age is what, and what are proposals to raise it, and how would that save the fund?
Right. So in 1935, when the Social Security program was first launched, they determined that 65 was the appropriate age for being eligible for withdrawing your Social Security benefits. That was based on roughly the average age that people tended to stop working around that time, and it's also has some relation to the estimated life expectancy at that time. Since then, life expectancy in the US has increased by about 15 years, give or take, and the Social Security retirement eligibility age has only been raised by 2 years. So the average beneficiary is now drawing on their benefits for roughly 13 years more than they were when the program was initially started. And at the same time, in recent decades, they've created a new eligibility bracket for people that want to retire earlier but get slightly less benefits. So you can actually retire at 62 years old and get Social Security benefits at a slightly lower payment rate. So I think one of the ways, this is another thing that I mentioned in my piece, and another potential reform would be to do as France has just done, which is raise the retirement age from 67 to at least 68, and from there to tie the eligibility age to changes in the life expectancy over time.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I mean, when we were kids, 65 was like ancient. But Harrison Ford's 80 and looks amazing in 1932. So, my grandparents are all lived into their mid 80s. 2 of them are alive at 86. So it just seems common sense. So first solution is to raise the rate. Second is to change how we do the adjustments for inflation. What is a third option for policymakers?
A third option, so in the piece, the third option I mentioned, I mean, there are many more than 3 that I could run through, but the third one that I mentioned in my piece is something that I've done some research into in the past, based on experiences in the UK with policy. One program that's actually tied into the Social Security program is the Social Security Disability Insurance Program. The program is set up so people who are incapable of working because of a disability, they can draw benefits from this program as well. And so there are now 12 million benefit recipients on the Social Security Disability Insurance Program. But this number has really exploded, especially over the last 2 decades, which is slightly unusual given that the kinds of work that people are doing today versus decades ago, it's much less manually intensive, tends to be more white-collar jobs today, yet more and more people are claiming physical disabilities and mental disabilities. And so there's some real issues with the eligibility criteria for this program. They have what's called the medical vocational grid, and I've done some digging into this in prior research. It just makes it really, really vague to talk about what sorts of disabilities qualify. For example, there's been an explosion in people who claim to have back pain. It's something that's very vague and difficult to sort of prove to a physician in order to qualify for these benefits. And so there's really been a huge explosion in beneficiaries in this program since those medical vocational guidelines have been implemented. So I think somebody has to take a look at those guidelines and make some reforms there. We should be drawing lessons from other countries that have successfully done this. So the UK did something similar about 10, 15 years ago with reforms to its disability insurance program. And it saw a huge increase in the number of beneficiaries getting back into work. It's a matter of making a distinction between being disabled and being incapacitated. So you literally cannot work. There is a very clear distinction, and it's quite clear that a large portion of those 12 million beneficiaries are capable of doing some form of work.
All right, I know you're more of an economist than a political analyst, but these all seem common sense to me. What are the chances that this will get done in time?
Well, this is where it gets depressing. This is why I like the policy and not the politics. I don't have high hopes. I have slightly higher hopes than I did last year, just because we have a divided government. But Social Security is truly the holy grail of American politics. Public support for the program is through the roof.
Yeah, Trump never even threatened to talk about touching it in any way.
Right. And we're not making the case that I'm not making the case that we need to scrap it altogether. I'm saying if we're going to have this program and it's going to be around in 75 years, you're going to have to make some reforms, and you're going to have to do them sooner rather than later. And the longer you postpone the pain, the larger those benefit cuts or tax increases are going to be. My reason for writing this piece was I wanted to try and appeal to a sort of bipartisan group. So I avoided talking about nominal benefit cuts or payroll tax increases. I wanted to try and find other avenues that both sides could possibly agree on. Maybe I'm hoping for too much, but I think it's a good time to have this discussion, particularly given that we're now moving into the debt ceiling debates, and we do have divided government, so there is some room for maneuverability around considering serious reforms to what are the biggest programs, Medicare and Social Security. And we have 5 months now to have those debates, and I think this should be a part of that discussion.
Now, I don't think I'm betraying any confidences that you were not born in America, and you probably have a much better understanding of British politics than I do. But when I look at American politics and the need for reforms like this, it sort of makes me feel hopeless, lost. I don't know. Do in the United Kingdom, when there's big challenges like this, is it easier for things to get done than it is for here, or is it just as intractable?
That's a good question, and it's not a clear. I don't have a clear-cut answer, but I would say this: it's easier to get things done in a parliamentary system, but that's not always a good thing. If there are reformers in government that share ideas with you, then it's a great thing. But when those people are not in government, it's quite the contrary. So it's a matter of do you want to have a system where you can quickly get things done, but things can quickly go wrong? Or do you want to have a system like the US where you do have some clear checks and balances? And so you often end up with stalemate and not getting very much done. But at the same time, when you have somebody in power who wants to do terrible things, that's actually a benefit to have that sort of system in place.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's a lot harder. It's a lot more insular when it comes to the protections. Okay, I mean, so these are great reforms and kind of nibbling around the edges. I mean, they're big things, right? But like if I waved a wand and put you in charge of redesigning the system or getting rid of the system, or one of the ideas when I was younger and watching politics was the lockbox, with Bush and Gore always debating what to do with Social Security and how to reform it. And Bush's idea was allowing me to contribute to my own account. I mean, are there some big ideas out there for Social Security that you say, I know this is a pipe dream, but I think this is really interesting?
I haven't seen any big outside of the box ideas. I mostly see proposals for the sort of reforms that I'm talking about. But in terms of big ideas, I think there's a serious lack of big ideas, particularly in the US politics space. Hopefully we'll see more of them. Maybe I can draw from some international examples and do some more digging and come up with some alternative market-oriented systems. If we were starting from scratch, it would be a much easier thing to argue. But given that we've got this system and it's got these funding flaws, we're going to have to try and work with what we have. I think another possible reform that should be talked about is diversifying the trust fund. It may at this point be too little too late, but I think it's still something we have to consider. The trust fund tends to accrue interest based on essentially on treasuries. So it only accrues about 2% interest per year, which isn't enough growth to sustain itself. I think we should be seriously considering diversifying that. The stock market returns 10% per year before inflation. And I think having a small fraction of the trust fund diversified could give us an extra % or 2 of growth, which again it sounds small, but when you add all these reforms up together, it could increase funding sustainability through the 75-year.
Yeah, I once talked to the treasurer of the state of Indiana, and they invest money. I mean, that's always like part of the, all these pension funds are invested in maybe ETFs or different trading funds. Or my own 401k is in, index funds, basically. But Social Security often gets called a pyramid scheme because it doesn't have any actual investment into it. It's just sort of you're just putting money into it. So it does seem to make sense that maybe, I don't know, it's probably good and bad if the United States became the biggest investor in some of these traded funds. But all right, actually, go ahead. Yeah.
So there was a congressman, I think he's newly appointed, who he was in an interview last week with Joy Reid. His name's Byron Donalds, and he mentioned that the Social Security Trust Fund was going to be depleted in 12, 13 years. And then Joy Reid responded with a thought-provoking and stimulating critical thinking skills by shouting the words, "That's not true," 13 times. But then what was interesting was that Donalds mentioned that the S&P 500 returns since 2006 would have more than taken care of Social Security, to which Reid responded, "You want to privatize Social Security." So, this debate is being had, but the same old fallacies and arguments that the other side is always pushing back on, they're still there. There's a big difference between saying you want to privatize Social Security and saying we need to diversify the funds. If that means putting 20% of the funds into equities rather than into treasuries, that's very different to saying, well, we need to privatize the entire system.
Or like in the Obama years where they want to kill grandma. I mean, there was literally an official Democratic Party advertisement with a Republican pushing an old lady, grandma out of her wheelchair down a hill. So I don't know. This debate has been a mess for a long time and will continue to be a mess because it's very personal. We see the money come out of our paychecks. We expect to get our money when we're older. People who are older rely on it. So, yeah, I get that it's personal. All right, Jack, shameless self-promotion time. Where can we follow your work?
Best place to follow my work is on my Young Voices bio page. And you can also find my Twitter handle there if you're into that sort of thing.
All right, very good. Thank you so much for joining me, Jack. I really appreciate your time. Thank you, listeners, for joining me here on The Chris Spangle Show. We greatly appreciate you being here. And if you learned something, please share it with your friends. That's the best way to help any creator, like a writer like Jack or a podcaster like myself, grow in their careers. So thank you so much. We'll see you again here on The Chris Spangle Show.